I am excited to be joined by Taylor Bennett, who heads public affairs at Lime, and you're fresh off the stage.
Fresh off the stage. I told you earlier, I thought it went really well, but ask the audience to get their feedback.
It's not up to you. Yeah, it's up to them. So there are a number of directions I want to go, but for folks who are listening who aren't immediately familiar with Lime, and there may be a couple, give us the really quick boilerplate, then we'll jump into what you do.
Yeah, so we are a smart mobility company, and what that means is scooters, bikes, small cars. You think of Uber, where you open the app and you hit a button, and you have a transportation option there. Same kind of thing with scooters, and it's dockless free mobility.
It is dockless free mobility, and you just mentioned a lot of stuff that exists and find utilization in the public space, in the public domain, and there's like some rules around it.
Yep.
Right? So I have to be in connection to laws and governing bodies and everything else, and I suppose that's really where your job comes into play. Public affairs, if you're listening and not certain about it, break it down for us real quickly.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I get that all the time. So public affairs is similar to communications and telling your story. I know your story is the theme here. So how do you tell your story, but to a regulator audience or policymakers or government officials? And what are the things that we need to do to make sure we're considering them and their needs? And I think one aspect of micromobility is it's really local. And when you have scooters and streets in communities across the country and across the globe, you really have to be mindful of the folks who are regulating those and providing value and working together. And so today, I was here to really talk about that relationship and being collaborative. And as we are crafting policy that supports our business, making sure that policy also supports cities and regulatory bodies as well.
Yeah, and a quick warning to anybody watching or listening who heard the word regulatory and started looking for the exits. Whatever you're up to or selling or involved in, you would really hope it becomes successful enough that word means a lot to you.
Yeah.
So if your venture is entirely unregulated, it is either illegal or not very big.
Yeah, that's it. It's a great point. At some point in time, the more you scale, the more your business will become regulated, and there'll be rules in place. And Lime, we knew that early on, and so to your point, a lot of folks think that regulation is a burden and it prevents their businesses from growing. But actually, it helped us accelerate. We're in over 100 cities now in 5 continents, and we were able to do that because we went in and had conversations about scooters with cities, and now they're comfortable and they've helped us scale really quickly. So it doesn't have to be scary.
No, it doesn't. And it's interesting, we hear regulations or a regulatory environment, and we tend to automatically think of a constraint. And I would remind anybody who has a car, you probably have car insurance, that regulatory action works out pretty well on the side of the insurers. It forces or requires a transaction. So when I think of a regulatory environment, I just think of a factor. Like, this is part of the situation the business operates within, and it can be positive or negative. And before we dive into all of that, I'm picturing you're a little kid, you're running around your backyard, a little Taylor, and you're thinking, someday I want to grow up and I want to be a director of public affairs. Is that how that works?
It was close. It was close. I had to first learn what public affairs was. I was a journalism major in college.
Really?
And I was. School of Journalism, North Carolina.
Really?
And I was.
What happened?
I know, right? But now I work with journalists, and I actually am not one, so I figure I was as close as I'll get. But I was always into advertising and marketing, and I had no idea what this sort of communications world was, and kind of fell into it. But as a kid, I had no idea I'd be in this. As a college kid, I had no idea where I was going to be today.
Did you have a moment of I don't want to use the word quitting on, but was there a decision where you went, journalism, I'm just not going to do that. That's not going to be me. Or was it more gradual? You got an opportunity, a thing happened, then one day you woke up, looked back, and realized, hey, I'm not.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I, actually in the School of Journalism at Chapel Hill, I took a community journalism class, and the whole semester was working with this neighboring publication, which was literally the Apex Herald. And I had to write a story and research, and became a journalist for a semester. and it was really awesome. I actually really enjoyed it. But then I realized that it is a very niche profession, and you have to really love it. And there were other opportunities out there that excited me.
Is niche like deep code for low paying? Is that what you just did there?
I do not know, but I do know that you have to be committed to it. And I was more about the storytelling and the brand building, and I got excited about telling the corporate story. And so working with these journalists and knowing that they are critical to our success is just as fun for me.
Well, it's interesting, and this is not uncommon on the pod, is we'll meet a founder or an executive or somebody doing something really interesting in a pure private sector commercial environment who spent some time in one of these fields, whether it's reporter, journalist, or they were a cop, or they worked somewhere in healthcare. But like, to go back to the joke, the kind of thing you would imagine you would grow up to do.
Yeah.
One of these roles that's in the fabric of our culture and that has some fable and some myth associated with it. And it wasn't quite right for them, but it helped frame the way they see the world.
Yeah.
Like it turned them into what they are. Would that be fair to apply to you?
Yeah, I think so. Having the responsibility of being a reporter and doing the research and building a story helped me understand from that point on that transition to PR, communications, or public affairs, you need media and you have to build stories. And I think the theme keeps coming back of today. We are all storytellers. And I think at that moment, it really helped me understand how to do that effectively. And so, yeah, there was this point where, that experience has led me to really be appreciative of what it takes to not only be a journalist, but what it takes to be in my profession and do it well.
Well, it's interesting. You've referenced story a couple times, and we've outed you as like a former journalist, so it's too late now. And one thing we got to handle here is, in your capacity that I'm sure you're very well paid for, we're talking about the creation of story. And if we aren't careful, there's a way to hear that and hear like, yeah, that's pretty inauthentic. He's talking about inventing a story on behalf of Lime, and that's designed to just maximize their opportunity or risk mitigation. That's very distinct from journalism or other kinds of storytelling. Help me resolve that, or that perceived inauthenticity.
Yeah, you raise a really important point. And today we are in an age where media, consumers, policymakers are sharper than ever, and the spinning, packaging your corporate intent in a way that's in a black box, it doesn't work anymore. And so you have to be authentic. You have to be transparent and open and honest about who you are as a company, who you are as a brand or an entrepreneur. And so I would say, that storytelling that isn't real doesn't work. And so with Lime, and with many other tech companies out there building their brands and telling their stories, it's what do you believe in and what are you committed to? And for us, it's getting people out of cars, it's sustainability, it's making urban living better by giving people more affordable ways to get around, or serving underserved communities because there's no metro stop and you now have a scooter. So it's what drives you, and then turning that into a story and making that jive with your communities that you're working with. We talked earlier about policymakers and regulators. They all have challenges in their cities, and tackling those challenges together with a real solution, and then telling that story is really effective.
Well, you're making a pretty convincing case that Lime has a belief system that precedes its value proposition. Like, it cares about something, and that works for you because there's a certain authenticity that you've got to be around. And what I wonder is, in your particular role in public affairs, is there occasionally some tension? Is there any part of your job where you find yourself kind of being an advocate? I mean, you're existing in a regulatory environment where, is there some sort of role for you saying, that's actually a good rule, and it's bad for our business? Or maybe the reverse, I don't know. What's that?
No, absolutely. And, when it comes to mobility, it's very local, and you have to approach it in a way that is tailor-made for that community. And so what works in one city might not work in another. And there are instances where we know that in Washington, D.C., for instance, we have 600 scooters in the streets. that's not nearly enough to serve a city the size of Washington, but in San Diego, Dallas, et cetera, there are thousands of scooters. And so, we advocate for rules that don't just make sense for our business to help us scale. They make sense for the people who, deserve a better option. And so, you're absolutely right. There is a bit of a conflict there, but it's making sure that whatever you're pushing for is actually serving a purpose for the people in that community and not because it translates well to another one.
Yeah, and here on the pod and here at Dig South, we have an interest in geography. We have an interest in culture as it influences creation and entrepreneurship. And when one thinks of the South, however you want to, you were in Chapel Hill, you probably got a pretty detailed theory of what is and isn't the South.
Yeah.
But, when you don't tend to think of the American South or Southeast as like a heavily regulatory region, right? So, I'm often in Portland, Oregon. There's just more rules, period. And there are far fewer here. What is it like for Lime to expand and compete in cities and have you ever found instances where there ought to be rules or the regulation you anticipate or feel would be safer doesn't exist?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I spent time at Uber prior, and ride sharing was brand new to cities. And so we had to go in and not only educate about ride sharing, but explain to consumers how it works and then what the right rules should be. And we're in the same situation now with scooter sharing and micromobility where, 2 years ago, you didn't have scooters on the streets and you couldn't open your phone and grab one off the sidewalk. And so, being able to understand that each city is different. And, we talk about San Francisco as a tech hub or DC or Boston or Austin, Charleston, Raleigh, North Carolina, Portland, Seattle. These places are all really innovative and embrace technology in their own right. And recognizing that and leveraging that to your benefit helps businesses grow. And the last point is one of the things I talked about earlier was regulation can actually help accelerate a business. And if you identify cities that are going to be your champion, you can actually grow a lot more quickly than if you focus on cities where they're a little more hesitant to do so. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, we've got folks listening and watching who have concepts that would have broad application in a municipal space, or perhaps to the states themselves or even a federal client. What would you say to somebody who has an idea and is a little intimidated about how would one even sell to a city? How does one interact with what does that even mean? Do you just wander in a city hall and start flinging business cards? What do you do?
Yeah, no, I mean, and literally it's that. It's opening the line of communication and, it's getting to know your city council member or, where you live in the city, who represents that district, how it operates. Is it the DOT that you should care about? Is it the Travel and Tourism Bureau? Who are the players that matter in your space and just getting to know them. And one of the things we're really proud at Lime is, when we launch new markets, we go in and we introduce ourselves, we talk about our model, how it works, how the product works, and building those relationships early, and giving somebody a cell phone to call when something goes wrong goes a lot further than asking for forgiveness
so
when
basically
when things hit the fan.
you. They need you to wander around
exactly
and meet
right,
everybody.
exactly right. But you're right. It takes education, it takes understanding, and you got to do a little homework to do that.
Talk to me about, pick out anyone you like, a common regulation or restriction, or you can go to a specific city if you want. If you could change one way we think about American cities or how we govern transportation within them, what would you have us as a society reconsider or change?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love this answer. It's thinking about cities shaped around people and not shaped around vehicles or industries or organizations. It's think about cities around people, and by that I mean, let's build cities that make it easier for us to get from A to B, or make it easier for us to find a hotel room or to get our things delivered. And so if we start thinking about urban mobility or urban living around human beings, it starts to all fall in line from there, and the regulations make a little more sense. The policies we're crafting start to advance innovation as opposed to protecting incumbents or getting bogged down in the way things have always been because that's the way we've always done it. So thinking about urban life whether it's cities, states, thinking about that around people and human beings, really shapes regulation more positively.
I love that, and it's beautiful at 30,000 feet. Give me a practical, tactical example. Are we literally talking about like more bike lanes?
Yeah.
Is it zoning districts that change density? Is it restrictions? Like what literally would be, if a community were to be people-centric, God help us, for the people who live there, what would it look like to you, or what would we notice as different?
Yeah, and you're seeing this in city after city where, New York City, Times Square there, I forget the crossroads, but it's right at Times Square. Two busy intersections converged, and it used to be just a mayhem of vehicles.
Yeah. Yep.
And now it is a common space of benches and bike lanes and parklets where you can, charge your e-bike and sit and have a sandwich on the other side of it. And so the before and after picture is really, really compelling. But you're seeing cities start to build space around people and then giving bike lanes to connect to that bus stop, or taking that row of parking and turning it into a pedestrian walkway or expanding sidewalks. So it's just thinking about life in a way that improves the way we move and live. And so tactically, it literally is changing the ecosystems we live in.
Well, I want to ask this carefully, and I know you're going to answer it carefully.
Please.
But it would be really hard to do your job or do it well and not have a keen sense of the political climate, not be an observation of that. And I'm not just talking about presidential politics. I'm talking about states and cities, and there's things you're not going to do and can't do. What is that relationship like? Meaning operating in a regulatory environment and knowing or watching, seeing these individuals who rise and fall, who have the power to change it. How does that shape your job?
Yeah, you're entirely correct. You have to work with the cities and the regulators, and knowing who those individuals are, it's really important. And what turns them, what motivates them. Three things that generally motivate elected officials. One, does this fix a problem? Is there a challenge in my city that this technology is helping to solve? Two, is it good for my constituents? These individuals elect me and put me in office. Does it advance them in some way? And then three, does it align with my political values as a party? If it goes against the grains of conservative or liberal ideology, it might not be something they're going to get behind. And if you understand those motivations and the climate in which you work, it makes it a lot easier to partner and turn the dial, because you're together working towards something, as opposed to going in it blind where you're going to be caught off guard because you didn't realize that person didn't care about that.
So in other words, you don't want to publicly endorse any candidate right here on the pod. You're not going to do that.
You want to endorse the ones that are going to advance your objectives.
All right, a little disappointing, but we'll let you get away with it. Real quickly before we get you out of here, I wonder what you would have to say to somebody listening who's maybe at Chapel Hill and maybe in journalism and maybe not totally feeling it. Right. So there are a lot of people who listen who have some sense of a different career or a path they could take. What changed for you? What was a critical decision that altered your trajectory? Why aren't you a reporter at some obscure newspaper in Western North Carolina?
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned, and this was halfway through, I was in the agency world in sort of the first half of my career, and I knew that I was passionate about what I was doing, but I wasn't passionate about the direction that I was going with that. Meaning, it was great to represent a bunch of organizations and clients and companies and sort of have a 30,000 foot engagement around it, but I was really excited about transportation mobility and this urban life. And so taking the leap into something that you actually care about just makes life a lot easier. It makes work a lot easier. And it's a little cliche and it sounds easier said than done, but there's a lot of jobs out there, and there's a lot of opportunity to create your own job. And if you see a challenge or you see something that needs fixing, there are ways to tackle that and be a change maker. And so for me, it was knowing that I was passionate about a particular industry and then finding ways to get into it, and hustling, as simple as that sounds, getting out and meeting the people in that space and offering.
Let's be clear. What you do now and being and I, forgive me, you were a journalism major in undergrad, or you went beyond that?
Undergrad,
okay, undergrad. Yeah, there's a little distance there.
Yeah, there is.
That's not like, you don't just walk up and be like, hey, I was going to do journalism, but I changed my mind. Public affairs. Like, there's some intermediary steps you're skipping past. Was there one particular job or job interview you can think of that sort of corrected the trajectory?
Yeah.
And if not, I don't know.
No, I will. This is sort of an embarrassing story, but
great. Let's do it.
So I was fresh out of college. I was interviewing, and I knew that I didn't want to be a journalist, so I wasn't going to newspapers. I was interviewing at PR agencies and firms and marketing consultancies. And one of the questions was, what's the difference between PR, advertising, and marketing? And there are very clear definitions there. And my answer was a long pause, and it was, you know what? I'm probably not right for this role. And we ended there, and we said thanks, and and now that definition's very clear in my mind. But I was this kid out of school who didn't know I wanted to do, and I didn't do my homework. So, that long gap of getting where I am, just take your time and be comfortable.
I love that. If you're constantly putting yourselves in situations where you know all the answers, I would encourage you to reconsider whatever you're doing.
Yep.
That's not a very creative place. That's a great example.
I would agree.
I love it. I love it so much. Taylor Bennett, Lime, it's been a huge pleasure to be with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great chatting.
Thanks.